Well, welcome everybody. I am going to wait just another moment for the last several people to join us, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right. Well, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us today on Benovate Explores, our new series, and it's a monthly conversation on health, risk, and really insurance for a changing industry. My name is Alex Earle, and I am Benovate's Director of Client Services. And today, we are going to meet our guest presenter, learn a little bit about data capture and the actionable results that come from that, and then have a bit of a Q&A discussion at the end. So make sure to stick around and ask your questions. All right, well, let's get started. Jake, if you want to go ahead and actually turn your mic on, I think we'll be able to hear you just a little bit better.
Yes, it would also help if I was speaking, but here we go. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I wanted to just give you a bit of an overview as to what we've been working on in the kind of the deep clinical risk management area within the commercial marketplace. My background, as you can see, has been primarily on the healthcare delivery side of the market. I began my career working in the value-based delivery of medicine when Kaiser Permanente on the West Coast was moving to more value-based care, and specifically around trying to figure out a way to get away from fee-for-service. So when it comes to the commercial marketplace, we started to see things like bundled payments, patient-centered medical homes, those types of things. And we're all trying to figure out how to control risk and cost. So spending my entire career working in the clinical risk area, primarily working with physicians to develop programs. And in the last 7 years, I was able to take my experience and start working and applying that risk management. So specifically delivering clinical services to large commercial populations, whether it's a self-funded employer, can be a TPA risk pool, can be a PBM, those types of things. So what I wanted to talk about today is what is actually the most important areas that we're working on right now, and that is how to actually deal with all of the data that we have access to. Because right now we have a ton of it. So the kind of the relevancy behind this right now is we are seeing claims data, we are seeing medical data, and then we have the data that's coming in from the carriers, which a lot of times is kind of just more of an overview. So the question is, what can we do with all of this data? What is actually relevant to our clients, the employers and the self-funded risk pools that we're all talking to and representing and we're serving? How do we help them utilize this mass of data, and why is it even important? So this first slide, it's interesting because it's actually from 2012. If you take the number 150 billion in 2012, it's actually now about $1.63 trillion that is wasted it's just wasted on inappropriate medical care or unnecessary medical care every year. I think there's a lot of, you guys have probably seen a lot of companies out there that are kind of working in that space, trying to reduce waste, trying to focus heavily on encouraging consumers to change the way that they shop for medical services, or I guess getting them to start shopping for medical services, being randomly taking whatever they get. So the reason that we believe this is important is because the medical system, as it is, where I came from, has a lot going on. We've all seen with the ACA and all of the other regulatory issues that healthcare is dealing with at the moment. Patient care and patient outcomes is actually a little bit lower on the list than we would all like to see it, especially when we're the patient. Also, if someone who is in one of our commercial groups is a patient and they start having problems. So the waste that we're talking about here is really indicative of a much larger problem that that medicine is dealing with at the moment. And because of that, it's making us, those of us who are in the broker consultant space, or those of us who are managing benefits at companies, it's making us have to pay attention to what the healthcare system is actually doing, even though we aren't necessarily healthcare or medical experts. So this is what I do on a day-to-day basis. I work with companies all over the country. I also work with the clinical services companies that manage this risk for commercial groups. So just a little bit to let you know what we've been doing with data to actually get after the problem that, that we are featuring here. So what we want to talk about is particularly the different types of data that are available. I think most people that are out there in the commercial space are seeing data visualization tools. And really what this is in my opinion, it's a little bit better data than what we're getting from our health plan at the moment. As we look at claims being administered, you know, we get to see what kind of claims, we get to see what our high risk claims are and those types of things. But it's not really doing anything other than putting it into a visual format. Level is patient level insights. This is when we can actually get risk groups and we can actually see that we have a cardiology group over here, we have a diabetes group over here, we have a CHF group over here. And we're able to tell that there's people out there who are having problems, and we're able to tell, in general, we're able to tell what types of problems they're having. But it's not the type of data that we can use to actually influence a population. We can make general decisions as to what's going on with our members, that what types of services we can add to them or what type of support that we can add to them. But at the end of the day, we will not be able to actually start making adjustments to the clinical processes. Or like I normally put it is, we actually have to kind of develop a hedge against physician mistakes and gaps in the medical system, just because we know what kind of stress the healthcare system is actually under. So it's not, I don't want it to sound like, you know, like we're trying to indict medicine and bash medicine, because that's not the point here. But what we all know is medicine needs support, it needs help. And our job for those of us who are, like I said, brokers, consultants, HR directors, our job is really to figure out, with the tools that we have and the leverage that we have, being in the positions we are, we have to start looking at this problem differently. We've looked at it a lot in the past, has really been, we've just maneuvered benefits around. We've changed out-of-pocket maximums, we've changed deductibles to try to keep premiums steady. I think we've all kind of realized now that we're going to have to go beyond just the administrative costs of a health plan to actually make a true impact. And what I wanted to talk about today was specifically about the types of clinical actions that can be taken in a health plan to start making that true impact, going well beyond administrative costs, actually getting in on the patient and physician level and starting to actually change the way that care is being delivered, and change the way that the members or the patient is actually looking at healthcare, the way that they consume it. So the real story behind this is the graphic we have here kind of shows these are the reports that we're getting back from a lot of our vendors or our claims administrators. We're seeing percentiles, and we're seeing multiples, and we're seeing these types of things, but it's making it difficult for us to actually get down and make meaningful change. So treatment level insights are what I really want to focus today on, and that's really taking the claims data, the pharmaceutical data, and the eligibility data, and running it through analytics engines that can get down to the actual individual and their individual claim consumption. Claim consumption, meaning looking at every prescription, the dosage of that prescription, how often that prescription is filled, where it's filled, if there's increases or decreases to that medication, and if there is, in what time frame has that happened. So I know a lot of times that description of treatment level data can kind of make us all go really wide-eyed and wonder, like, how the heck am I supposed to deal with that? But fortunately, of really good clinical service firms that are actually built specifically to serve the commercial marketplace that are out there doing things just like that. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. Next, please. All righty. So I want to talk a little bit about a case example. And the example we're going to use today is specifically around behavioral health. So behavioral health, we all know, is a little bit tricky because we don't have the same biometrics and really black and white types of diagnostics and standard clinical processes that the rest of medicine follows. You know, when we have a diabetes patient, we know we're watching A1C, we're watching glucose, and we're watching kidney function. And we're also watching liver function based on the medications they're on, because they're also processed through that organ. But beyond that, when you look at behavioral health, we don't necessarily have a metric that we can use in behavioral health. Currently, we're using something called the DSM-5, which is basically a questionnaire. And we all know that a questionnaire is dependent on the answers we get back from the patient or the member. And we have to then make some type of objective decision based on the answers we get back. There's no real biometrics that we can use to control behavioral health. So treatment level insights as it relates to data is incredibly important when going after behavioral. We saw in the previous slide, behavioral health is an area that's impacting the vast majority of a high-risk population. So if you look at a general member pool today, we're actually seeing that about 25% of the members in that pool are dealing with a mental health challenge. That number is incredibly high. The interesting thing about that is there's only a portion of that 25% that you could actually identify through claims data, meaning they have a diagnosis or they're currently being treated with a psychotropic drug or something like that. In that type of situation, there is a large chunk of people that are unidentified because it's not obvious. If you don't get into the treatment level data and look at claims patterns, looking at hospitalizations or ER admissions, then you're going to miss people who the medical system is just treating medically, but it's clear that there's another confounding factor. And in most cases, that is a behavioral health challenge that is going untreated and unrecognized. So what we do when we take treatment level data insights and we start moving them through a process of clinical decisions is we're moving away from kind of the way that we've done medicine for the last several decades, which is building it off of standard clinical protocols. And what that is is basically you take a certain set of symptoms, you group them together, and you call them something, which is a diagnosis, and then you treat them in a standardized way, in an acceptable way. And that's where all of our, well, the vast majority of our medical care is delivered that way. What's happening now, the best possible medical interventions that I've ever encountered have moved beyond standard clinical protocols and have found ways to actually tailor the treatment plan and the way the member is being taken care of on the provider level. It's actually moving them into a process to where they are having a treatment plan designed particularly for them, meaning they're not just a set of symptoms anymore. We're actually looking at that individual in their entirety and going as deep as analyzing their DNA and being able to measure things like the level of drug in their system, and I should say level of medication, just so we are clear, level of medication in their system, and making sure that it's being prescribed and taken appropriately. So you can see that as we move through the data steps, we really don't start making the massive impact that we want to make until we get to the actions. And the actions are where, really where we are getting down to the physician level, between the physician and patient relationship, and we're providing the physician with insights they didn't have before. We're providing them with information they didn't really know they needed. And in a lot of cases, we're trying to just plug the holes and fill the gaps that on the clinical level, the member has the perfect type of treatment plan for their specific situation at that time. And I know that sounds like a stretch goal to most people, but the good news is today we are actually seeing that. We are actually accomplishing these things. And we're doing it in areas that normally would seem incredibly sticky. Things like autoimmune disease. We're doing this in oncology. We're doing this in cardiology. We're doing this in specialty drugs, which obviously link to autoimmune diseases. And the vast majority of drugs that are being approved by the FDA on a day-to-day basis, at least in the last 6 months, have been specialty drugs. So the encouraging thing for everyone out there who has some type of fiduciary responsibility around a health plan, the encouraging thing is that we're able to start doing better things with the data that's available. Between data that is incredibly actionable and important versus the data that is kind of noise. And we're then able to take that data and we're able to start moving it through the steps of having insights to actually starting to make decisions about what insights are most important, and then taking those insights and moving them into actionable clinical processes where we're getting down, providing that physician on the ground with the support they need in medical situations that help to eliminate waste, they eliminate overspending, and get us to a much, much better clinical outcome, which, as we all know, saves money. So that's it. Am I in my time, Alex?
Yes, you certainly are. And,
Okay.
thank you, Jake. I think that was really fascinating. And there's so many elements to this, and I completely agree that it's all about, zeroing in on kind of the right thing at the right time. As many of us know, there are a wide variety of different approaches using the data that's collected through engagement programs, through clinical programs. And often, sadly, there's really nothing that a lot of people do. And here in Benovate, we kind of refer to that as the what now phenomena. One example, specifically from what Benovate does to address this is to provide, real-time information on identified risks within a population, as well as information on the types of activities that members are completing to address their risks. From there, addressing gaps in programming, identifying opportunities for improvement really become, part of the ongoing strategy versus just, kind of a once-a-year exercise. So, with that in mind, we actually get to go to the fun part now. At this point, we invite everybody to please take yourselves off mute and join our discussion. What questions might we have for Jake from the participants here today? Let's see here. You know what? We are getting a question here from chat. Jake, can you share with us an example of how you've seen organizations implement programs that harness data to drive engagement in a risk or disease-specific case?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my example, I talked a little bit about behavioral health and behavioral health because one of the most puzzling examples of how do you take a population that is largely unidentified and very hard to measure and start adding almost precision medicine level insights to the physician and a provider on the ground. But the other relevant example that I would use just right now that's kind of simple and in the media is looking at the opioid epidemic. We can find opioids when we look at claims data. They're out there, we know what codes are associated with them, and we can see how long a member has been on them. Here's the tricky part. How do you change that? How do you actually get down to the provider level and start getting after how that provider is actually prescribing for that patient and figuring out how do we move this patient into a treatment process that can resolve the long-term pain that caused that opioid prescription in the beginning. So a good example of that would be we actually have a physician case management service that identifies the members who are struggling, but actually works with the physicians who are treating those members and prescribing those members those opioids and making sure that the physician has the appropriate agreements signed with that member. A lot of people don't realize that to actually be on an opioid long-term, which long-term is actually 90 days or more, that's actually all they're clinically indicated for. If you're taking a pain management drug beyond 90 days, you are outside of the clinical range as far as what it's been researched and intended for. The physician has to have an agreement with that patient and make sure that the patient has been clearly communicated the risks. That physician also should be doing what's called an LCMS test. It's liquid chromatography mass spectrometry. That is the type of test that not only can see that there's a medication in your system, but it actually can tell exactly how much is in your system. That gives the physician information that tells them if the drug is being taken as prescribed and the member isn't overtaking a drug, or there's no drug in the member's system and they're selling that drug on the black market or something like that. But when we can get down onto the physician level and actually change the way that the physician is seeing the patient and manage that, because at the plan level we control who gets paid. So physicians have to comply in an opioid case management program, because if they want to continue to see the member and be reimbursed for their services and their visits and their diagnostics, they have to comply with the management protocol. And the great thing is this type of process can be built into a plan to manage risk, even without changes to the summary plan document or having to do it on renewal. You can do this immediately and move this directly into the environments of the providers that are services to the members right now. You can also wait and you can bake it into the plan documents and you can make it a required service, basically saying there is no reimbursement going back to the provider unless the provider complies and enrolls in the opioid case management program. So that to me would be a great example of a relevant problem that we all know about. We're all being told how many people are dying of opioids or struggling with this every day. But very few people are giving us any solutions as to how we deal with it. That would be a great of how we're going to deal with it.
Well, thanks, Jake. I appreciate that. Anyone else that's joined us that would like to ask a question for Jake? Let's see. All right, I've got another question coming in here. So Jake, for someone that may be taking, kind of their first several steps, with data, what's your recommendation for how to approach data capture and use in a meaningful way? What are maybe some of the top things a group should be aware of as they take their first steps?
Yeah, I think it's important for a group to start the journey into data capture with a clear idea of what it is they're trying to accomplish. Data is big, and it's daunting, especially claims data. And if you're not a medical professional, translating claims data into what's going on the ground, what's actually being done in the office, that gap of understanding can really, it can confuse a lot of people who are trying to do. So the very first step that you have to take is really make sure you understand what it is you're trying to accomplish. Are you trying to identify specific risk groups in your population and find out how much the average spend is? Once you know that, do you then prioritize the risks in your population that you want to start going after? So you look at your population and you say, man, our diabetes population is large. It's larger than the average commercial population, so we want to focus our attention there. Well, what is it that you want to focus on? Do you want to start focusing on the problems that a lot of commercial populations have, such as 80% of the diabetics that are on their health plan and are taking diabetes medications are not testing on a day-to-day basis? That is a first step in data to start saying, okay, we have a general idea of who our at-risk population is. We have identified a resource that has clinical efficacy behind it that we can deliver to these patients, and we can actually put a reward behind it. So, for example, if we want our diabetes or a diabetic population to actually start testing, then what we can do is we can provide them zero copay test strips and zero cost meters. So we can encourage them to enroll in a program like that. We can get them habit of monitoring their own blood sugar, and through that behavior, because that actually gets down to real behavior change, which is really the key to all of this working. Through that behavior change, now you have someone who's more responsibly managing their own disease. They're still using healthcare, and they're still using medications and company money, but the company in that type of situation is avoiding all of the other types of diagnoses that can happen when a diabetic is poorly managed. You have blood sugar problems or blood pressure problems that come shortly thereafter because you're impacting the kidneys, you're impacting the cardiovascular system. A lot of times you have things like restless leg syndrome that's caused by damage to the nerves because of the level of sugars that are in the blood. All of those types of things, even hormone imbalances and thyroid disorders because of high blood sugar happen. So if you can start to eliminate those types of things, you start to eliminate kind of that large swirl of increasing claims and increasing medical services that an at-risk member consumes on a day-to-day basis. So hopefully that answered that question.
I think that's great information. Very much appreciated. So with that, I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you again, Jake, our special guest for this first presentation of Benovate Explores. Invite everyone else to join us next month. That will be February 21st at 11:30 a.m. Central. Quick note, if anybody that's joined us today has ideas for future topics, please either tweet at us or send myself an email. You can reach me at earl@benovate.com. And with that, have a great day. Thank you all for joining.